How do you handle hospitality? We've been going through a sermon series looking at some things of the holidays that might stress us out a little bit or that can be hard. And we've been looking at how God handles them. I hope I don't make you too hungry putting that in front of you. Don't worry, there's nothing in it, so it's not too tempting. But today we're going to dive into how God handles hospitality. And as we get started, I want to present two pictures to you. Two different houses that I want you to keep in the back of your mind. The first house, you approach the house, you come, you knock on the door. The host comes, opens the door, welcomes you in, and this is the scene you see. You come in, and the house is immaculately clean. The carpet looks like it's just been vacuumed and steamed. The couch in the living room is perfectly pressed. It looks like it had just come off of the showroom floor and that plastic covering had just been taken off. And you go to sit down and you're a little gingerly sitting, not sure, I don't want to mess this couch up, it looks really nice. You go into the kitchen and there is a feast laid out on the table. Everything has been prepared, everything is ready, everything is set. The tablecloth, nice and white. There's some nice china in a cabinet behind glass. And this is the first home you walk into. The second home, you walk up to the door, you knock. You hear some noise in the background, and the host comes and opens the door. And as you walk in, you hear children in the background laughing, playing. You hear a dog barking somewhere, and the carpet might have a random paw print stain, and there might be a random mark on the wall where a kid got a little too artistic on something they shouldn't have. And you go into the living room, and there's the couch, and it is well worn. And you sit down, and it gives you a hug because it's so well worn. And it's a little hard to get out of. And then you go into the kitchen, and on the table there is food. But there's still a couple things on the stove that are still getting ready. Maybe one's starting to boil over because your host came and answered the door. This is the second home. What emotions, what feelings do each of those scenarios, those houses, invoke in you? How do you feel walking into this space? And it might be different whether you are host or you are guest. And which one makes you feel more comfortable? Which one makes you feel more at home? Which one feels you feel like you've been invited into someone's life? So keep those tucked away in the back of your mind as we talk about hospitality this morning. You read earlier our scripture reading in Luke chapter 1, and I'm going to read a little bit of it with you this morning, verses 39 through 40 and verse 43. So Mary, right upon hearing the news from the angel that God has chosen her to give birth to the Messiah, she rushes off to visit her cousin because the angel also told her that her cousin Elizabeth was also having a child of promise. And it reads, starting in verse 39, "A few days later, Mary hurried to the hill country of Judea, to the town where Zechariah lived. She entered the house and greeted Elizabeth. And then in verse 43, it says, 'Why am I so honored that the mother of my Lord should visit me?' This is Elizabeth's response to Mary showing up. Seemingly, Mary shows up unannounced. The Bible doesn't tell us that Mary heard the news from the angel and she quickly wrote a letter and sent it off ahead of her to warn Elizabeth, hey, I'm coming to you. No, it just says Mary got her stuff together and she went off to visit Elizabeth. And she arrives at Elizabeth's house, and her welcome, her reception is one of joy. It is one of rejoicing, right? Elizabeth is excited that Mary has come to visit her. And there's rejoicing in what God has done in their lives and what he is doing, right? Mary has not even talked to Elizabeth yet. She hasn't told Elizabeth what is going on in her life. And yet, under the Holy Spirit, Elizabeth knows Mary also has a child of promise. Mary is the mother of my Lord, right? She says, who am I that the mother of my Lord should visit me? And so there is excitement. And what does this story of Mary visiting Elizabeth and Elizabeth's reception of her, and other stories in the Bible of hospitality, tell us about how we should go about hospitality today? What lessons are there for us? When I think of hospitality, I think of the dinner table, right? We've got a casserole dish over here. I think of meal times. We invite people into our homes, we eat meals with them, we eat together. And growing up, there was chores in my family that often revolved around the dinner table. I am one of four. I have an older sister and two younger brothers. And we had daily chores and we had weekly chores, and they would rotate, right? We had our Friday afternoon chores to prepare for Sabbath. And we had the daily chores that had to do with the dinner table and hospitality. And those chores, there being four of us, there were four different things you could be assigned to. One was setting the table, one was clearing the table, and then two would be assigned to dishes. I grew up in an old house in Virginia, and it was old enough that it did not have AC and it did not have a dishwasher. Some of you kids out there might be gasping in horror. What? You didn't have a dishwasher? You didn't have AC? So the dishes got assigned to us kids, and we would constantly bug my parents, like, why wouldn't you just get a dishwasher? Everyone else has a dishwasher, just buy one. It would free us up, we wouldn't have to do the dishes. And my mom always loved to respond that, why would I buy a dishwasher when I have four of them? And so we were stuck doing the dishes. And it eventually evolved to where the dishes became a bit of a competition. And those of us who were assigned to the dishes would hurry up, finish our plate, we would eat, and we'd dash up to the sinks and start doing the dishes that were used in preparation for the meal that were already on the counter. And we'd quickly go through those, and then the person clearing the table had already got started to get some stuff up on the counter, and we'd wash those. But our goal, as the dishwashers, was to finish washing the dishes that were on the counter before the person who was clearing could get all of the dishes to the counter. And so we would rush and we would race, and a few times, there were a couple times where it did happen, where we would finish before the person clearing, and we'd quickly unplug the drain in the sink and dash out of the kitchen, yelling behind us, you took too long, you have to do the rest of the dishes. And it was our little way of like, I'm doing too much. Like the dishes, it's not fair. All you have to do is do this simple, short little clear the table, and I'm stuck here doing dishes for 6 people. And if we had guests over and we were hosting, who knows how many more people, right? And it was a lot of dishes. And so we had this mentality at one point of, it's not fair. I'm doing more than my fair share. And this mentality sneaks into so many areas of our lives, and it is such a human response. And there's a story in the Bible that we're going to turn to. It's a common one that we've heard a lot, where someone is grumbling that maybe they're doing more than their fair share. And what does this teach us about hospitality? So turn with me to Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. It says, as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. The Mary and Martha story. We've heard it a lot. We have heard it preached. And I'm just going to say it. Martha gets a bad rap, okay? Martha, we put her in this light of, look, Martha's doing and not being, and Martha's not doing what she's supposed to. Look, Mary has chosen the better thing, and she's doing it. And we harp on Martha, and I'm going to just say, a lot of us, there are moments where we are Martha, and there are moments where we are Mary. Usually we're not just one or the other. And Martha, her doing is something that is expected, all right? Doing is good. In fact, her hospitality, her putting on a dinner, making preparations for her guests was expected. Hospitality in the Bible, you were expected to welcome the guests into your home, whether they were announced or unannounced, whether they were someone you knew or they were a stranger. It was a moral obligation. It was a sacred duty to be able to welcome someone into your home and provide for them. And so Martha, she feels like she's in the right. She is providing something that is expected. And Mary, right, on the other hand, has chosen to sit at Jesus' feet. And the thing that Mary has chosen, that Jesus is describing here, that will not be taken away from her, is relationship. Mary has chosen, now that Jesus has walked through the door, to go ahead and sit down and engage in relationship. The story doesn't say whether Mary was helping Martha prepare anything before or not. She may have been. But the point remains, once Jesus was in the house, Mary was engaging in relationship, and Martha was in the kitchen. And Martha was grumbling, right? The problem isn't what she's doing. The problem isn't that she's cooking and she's providing these things. Her problem is that she's grumbling about it. She's upset about it. I don't know if you've been there. I have. And it's usually when people you know well are over, or your family is over. And you might be in the kitchen preparing something, or you might be setting the table, whatever it may be, you're going about a task. And you're over there grumbling to yourself, right? You're chopping onions and you're frustrated tears, then you're just blaming on the onions. But you're like, I'm the only one in here doing the work. My family is here, my friends are here, people are visiting, and I want to be able to engage in, talking with them. I want to engage in the family games that are happening, but I'm stuck here doing the work because no one else is doing it, right? I've been there. I don't know if you have. Maybe it's only me. But we can get into a mindset of it's not fair. I'm doing it all. I'm the one doing the work, and why is no one else helping me, right? And I'm upset that I'm being host. And that is not very hospitable. And the attitude, right, it's not the problem that we're doing, but the attitude with which we do these things, the attitude with which we host other people, and the extent to which our doing gets in the way of our relationships matters. Tim Chester, in A Meal with Jesus, puts it this way. He says, some of us have to learn that our guests matter more than our hospitality. Our aim is to serve, not to impress. Hits a little hard, right? My guests matter more than my hospitality. My guests matter more than if my house looks perfect or if my meal turned out the way I wanted it to. My guests matter more. In our culture, we have largely lost the dinner table, the place where hospitality generally we think of as taking place. And what do I mean by this? It's not right that we don't eat together. We do, but usually it's a very fast pace, right? We have events to get to, we have schedules, we have timelines, we have things to do. And we often, right, throw something in the microwave to eat really quick before we rush out the door, or we're grabbing something to eat in the car together while we're going somewhere. And it's very quick. And I heard a statistic that said the average dinner time lasts 9 minutes in the American household. It used to last an hour and a half. That is a really, really big difference. 9 minutes, only 9 minutes to engage in eating together and talking together. And if it is where we get to sit down and eat together and spend a little longer time, generally it's scheduled out, right? It's, hey, in 2 weeks from now, at this time, for this meal, we're going to come together and we're going to eat together, right? There's not often an unexpected guest popping in for a meal. And when it's planned out like that, cue the hurried rush to get the house perfect, make everything clean, make the meal the best it can be to get it set on the table, get the kids in perfect order, right? Make sure they're on their best behavior, make sure the dog is out back where if he barks, it's not too loud. Make sure everything is picture perfect, Instagram worthy, right? And this attitude, this mindset is where the anxiety and the stress starts to come in, right? All of a sudden, I am worried about What do I look like? What are they going to think when they come to my house for a meal? And more often, I would argue, in our culture today, we are practicing entertainment, not hospitality. We are practicing the art of come into my home and see everything I've done. Come into my home and see this picture-perfect life I live that doesn't have messes in it, doesn't have accidents in it, doesn't have messed up carpets in it, right? And we have this stress around hosting for the holidays because these are the thoughts that are running through our mind. Will my parents approve? Will the in-laws approve? Do they think I'm doing enough? Will my spouse or my brother or my sister be doing enough to help me that I can take a step back and enjoy the holiday as well? And these thoughts are going through our mind. And they run and they run and they run, and our anxiety and our stress heightens, right? As the time gets closer to people coming to our house, we're worried about what we will be perceived as. Again, Tim Chester, in the book A Meal with Jesus, says, when God's opinion is what matters most, the God who smiles on us in his grace, then we're liberated to serve others out of love, rather than to gain their good opinion. When we stop seeking the approval of others and stop framing hospitality and people visiting as a measure of my worth, as a measure of my value, as a measure of my competency, we're freed up to be a window. And not a window into ourselves, but a window into God and his character and his grace and his love. Hosts in the Bible did not have this time to prepare often for their guests. I think of stories like Abraham, right? When we think of hospitality, often we turn to that story. Abraham welcomes in strangers to his home. And in fact, he goes out after them, right? He sees them and he's like, hey, come in. I have a place for you. Come, take a rest. Let me go prepare the food. Food isn't prepared. He says, I have to go get it. I'll bring it back, but I'll make you food. I'll supply, give you a place to rest and a place to eat. I think of Lot, who also welcomed in, right, the angels into his home. He provides them a place of security. And even in the New Testament, Zacchaeus, right? Jesus is the guest now. And Jesus doesn't say, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house next week. Can you make sure that your house is in order and that you have a meal prepared for me? He says, hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house today. Let's eat together, right? Let's just go home and eat. And so the house will be what it will be, right? Toys may still be strewn across the living room floor. The kids may not be quiet. They may not be, right, the perfect-mannered little angels you want them to be. I may not have the latest decorations up. My house may not look Instagram perfect. My meal may not be the 5-course meal I would have wanted it to be. But in practicing biblical hospitality, I have invited you into my life and into my vulnerable space as it is. I am letting you see a window into God sustaining me daily. In Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, is a familiar verse. He says, then Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. Often at this time of year, as we're welcoming people into our homes, we feel that our burden is not light. We feel the stress to perform and to do and to have an image to portray. And yet Jesus says, give it to me. Give it to me. You're heavy laden. You're worried about many things, right? But I want you to give it to me, take on my yoke of rest, and focus on the important thing. Focus on relationship. And so coming back around to our Christmas story of Mary visiting Elizabeth, Scripture tells us that Mary visited Elizabeth for 3 months. 3 months is a long time. It says in verse 56 of Luke 1, Mary stayed with Elizabeth about 3 months and then went back to her own home. This would be the last 3 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy and the first 3 months of Mary's. The last 3 months of pregnancy can be a hard time. You are preparing for this child to arrive. You are getting anxious and excited for the child to arrive. As each week passes, you're getting more and more uncomfortable, not able to do as many things. And so this is a vulnerable time for Elizabeth, and yet she says, Mary, come on in. Come and live with me, right? And her house, if you live with someone for 3 months, if you've had a roommate, right? First day, maybe it all looks perfect. Maybe everything's neat and tidy, it's put together, my things are organized. By month 3, you know how they really live. Real life has happened and things get thrown everywhere and things happen, right? In 3 months, Mary's living with Elizabeth and she gets a glimpse into Elizabeth's everyday life. And what's even more important, I believe, for Mary then, is she's getting a glimpse into a journey that she's about to walk. She's at the beginning of her pregnancy. She's at the beginning of a promise that God has given her. Elizabeth is at the end of her pregnancy and at the end of a promise that God has given her. And Mary is given the gift of seeing Elizabeth walk day by day in the promise of God, trusting that he will fulfill his word to her, and she sees the completion of it. And then Mary can leave and go back home after 3 months, a little bit stronger, right? A little more secure. God gave my cousin Elizabeth a promise, and he came through. He fulfilled it. And I can go home, trusting that he will fulfill his word that he gave to me. And so Elizabeth, opening her home to Mary, gave Mary a window into God's character, gave Mary a window into seeing God working in Elizabeth's life and God fulfilling promises. New Testament professor Carolyn Osick says, hospitality in the Bible gives weary strangers a refuge from travel, heals broken relationships, and celebrates the presence of God in and as the guest. So for us, you can imagine those two houses at the beginning again. Imagine if you're a guest walking into someone's house or you're a host, which one is inviting others into your vulnerable space? Which one is inviting others in to see God's grace working in and through you day to day? And as we welcome people into our homes this holiday season, I pray that these are the things that happen. That strangers get a refuge from travel. That broken relationships are healed. And that the presence of God is celebrated in and as the guest. The well-being of our relationships to our guests is more important than whether my house looks picture perfect. This is how God handles hospitality.